Welcome back to another video on Rancor Reptiles. Today we're going to be going on over another bird's eye view. If you like this bird's eye view series, please leave a like, subscribe. Subscribe, huh? Huh? You like these videos? Subscribe, huh? Huh? I'm not be that cute, but you know, subscribe. Or you can go down below, leave a comment, maybe even a suggestion for another species that we can do another bird's eye view. So let's get started. Today's bird's eye view is on the Viper boa. Viper boas are not venomous. Viper boas are not venomous, but they do have a very nasty personality. I liken Viper boas to the short-tailed Sumatran boas or the blood pythons. They're very chunky. Viper boas and all these other short-tailed pythons are very chunky. They're thick-bodied and they're not that long. Viper boas get to around 3 to 4 feet total in length. However, they're very thick-bodied, and they have the same shitty attitude that bloods and short-tailed Sumatrans do. They're not very handleable. You can make them handleable. However, that's gonna, provide the animal with some stress. Now, since Viper boas aren't venomous, why do they get the name? Viper boas they basically live in the same region as the death adder. The death adders look very similar to the Viper boas. And so the Viper boas were called Viper boas because they looked like the Viper death adder. Now, because of this, the Viper boa, and the shitty, nasty attitude they have, people in the wild, they're living out their day and they see a snake and it looks like a death adder and it has the same nasty disposition, and they end up killing the snake. And it wasn't a death adder, it was a Viper boa just being, defensive. And so a non-venomous snake got the bad rap for the death adder. Of course, this probably happened via evolution to make this boa basically evolved to look like a venomous snake, so predators would stay away from it. However, now it's working against it because now humans they're being frightened by this death adder lookalike, and they kill it on the spot because they fear injury. However, so these guys can be tamed down and basically become tamed out enough for them to be held. Like blood pythons and short-tailed Sumatrans, it can be done. However, you're gonna get a lot of bites, and it's gonna be a long road for that to happen, right? However, these guys look absolutely fantastic. They look like vipers, which is cool. One of my favorite snakes of all time is the Gaboon pit viper and the rhinoceros viper. So it looks this animal looks almost just like that, minus the cool scalation. However, it's still a rad looking animal. Now, let's say I've interested you on getting this guy. There are 3 distinct different barriers of entry to get this particular animal, and so let's talk about them. First one is environmental barrier. The environmental barrier here is basically the humidity. These guys like mid to high humidity and ambient temperatures. So that basically means that this animal has to be in basically a PVC enclosure in a rack system, basically in an enclosure that doesn't, that has good ventilation, but not so good that it sucks out all the humidity in the enclosure, such as racks or PVCs. Those are prime good examples for good enclosures. And they like ambient temperature, which basically translates to heat mat or heat tape or low wattage heat bulb. Of course, that mat or heat wire needs to be on a thermostat, not too high. And so the environmentals are basically set very low. This is environmental has a very low barrier to entry. Let's talk about the spatial. These guys are mostly terrestrial. They really don't climb. They're very thick bodied, so they're on the floor. So this basically means that they're greatly suitable for tubs. Just like a ball python, they're very well suited for tubs. And like I said, PVC enclosures as well. And because they're well suited for rack systems and PVC enclosures, they really don't need, you can really stack them on top of each other, right? If you have several Viper boas, they really do well in there. So the constraints for spatial or low to mid if you really want to give them a nice big PVC enclosure, to low if you just want to give them a tub or space in your rack. For like if you have a nice ball python rack with nice big tubs, it would do perfectly well in there as well. So let's talk about the third barrier, and it's the financial. The financial barrier here is basically set up midway. The animal is not all that expensive, and the enclosure can, be from cheap to expensive depending on where you're shooting, right? Fairly cheap if you have space in your rack, fairly expensive if you want to give them a very nice bioactive PVC enclosure. These particular animals aren't going to break your bank if you're trying to buy them, right? They're not worth over $1,000. They are worth a couple of $100, and so they're not all that cheap either. So it's middle of the road here. Middle of the road for their enclosure, middle of the road for the animals, so the financials won't break your bank unless you're trying to get this guy a house. So let's say that the barriers of entry are perfectly suitable for you and they're not really much of an issue for you. There really shouldn't be, since they're fairly easy. Let's talk about what type of setup you need to have set up for these guys if you are expecting to have one in. Now the hot spot for this particular animal is going to be around 88, with 80 degrees being the ambient temperature. It's a little warmer, however it's not too hot, really. Depending on where you live, the ambient temperature can get up to 80 very easily. However, during the cooler months, you might have to, produce or give this animal some more heat, right? Like I said, these guys like high humidity from 70 to 80%. I liken this type of humidity to, say, rainbow boas. However, if you have a nice plastic PVC enclosure suitable for like rainbow boas, these guys will do perfectly well there as well. These guys like to soak, so you're gonna have to provide a fairly big water dish for these guys, and because they like to soak, you gotta make sure that you don't fill up the bowl all the way up or they might make a mess. High humidity, splashing water in your enclosure, that might be grounds for molds and funguses to come up. So you got to be very careful on your water dish and type of substrate you have. Now these guys like belly heat, it's preferred, and because like I said, they like to live in such high humidity and like to soak, you gotta make sure that you have mold resistant and fungus resistant substrate like coconut chip. These guys overall are very well suited for tubs. I'm gonna keep saying it once and over again. These guys should not be placed into glass aquariums. They're very shy animals. They like to soak. They like high humidity. And you can plastic retrofit an exoteric to make sure that the humidity is high all the time. However, let's be real here. A shy animal is a shy animal. It probably won't like glass terraria too much. So keep them in bins. Keep them in PVC enclosures. They'll do perfectly well there. And I strongly encourage that you keep them there as well if this is the first time you have Viper boas in your care. So let's talk about the husbandry. These guys eat once every 15 days appropriately sized meals. An appropriate sized meal for these guys is basically the thickness of the prey animal matches the thickness of the snake. That's a very big prey animal when considered. However, they only eat once every 2 weeks. It's very important that you don't overfeed your viper boas because these guys don't eat all that often. And so if you feed them too much, they gain weight way too quickly, and their health tends to deteriorate fairly quickly. These guys really like a high humidity, and because they do like to soak, I highly recommend that you have a nice big water dish and you spray accordingly. Make sure you have a nice hydrometer in their enclosure or in their bin to make sure that you're hitting that humidity, and you're changing out the water frequently enough so these guys can soak in nice clean water. If you have a nice big water dish for them to soak in, that will really help keep the humidity high as well. So these things do feed into each other. Now, this high humidity, and their preference to soak might produce problems with, if their bacterial load is too high in the enclosure. Let's say they poop in the water and you don't clean it out, or they poop in the substrate and you're negligent. They might start developing skin infections. You got to be very careful, and you got to be very sure that you're providing a nice clean enclosure, because high humidity really does promote skin infections with animals, especially here with these snakes. So you make sure that they're in a very nice sterile environment with nice clean water, replaced almost daily. So make sure you're on top of that. Next is quite simply the breeding of the viper boas, and it's very straightforward. Females do not have spurs, and males do. What spurs are is at the cloaca, basically where the snake poops from. And ball pythons and core snakes, there's these 2 little claws at the cloaca. Males have those and females don't, so you can sex these animals fairly easily. Females, they lay a litter. They don't produce eggs, they produce live young because they are boas, and they produce around 10 to 20 offspring or neonates once about every year. You can have them breed about once every 8 months. However, to be on the safe side, you can breed them out once every year, and they produce quite a bit of offspring. Of course, neonates being a little fragile, you have to be very careful with their care. However, they're pretty cool, simple to sex as well. So let's talk about the cons. What's the bad side? From all we talked about, you got to be on top of your humidity. You got to make sure that these guys have the proper humidity. I'll probably pile drive this when I make the video on rainbow boas as well. These guys thrive in higher humidity. Make sure you can provide that for them. Misting systems, daily checks, have alerts. I know they sell various types of monitors that can send you reports on the humidity in case if it drops too low. It is just one of those animals that like and need high humidity, so make sure you can give that to them. However, all your care, love, and dedication to the animal producing a nice, clean, sterile, high humidity environment will be taken for granted because they have a nasty personality. Nasty. Like I said, all animals are different. Each one carries a different personality. However, viper boas have the personality of vipers. They will bite you. They won't kill you. However, they will bite you. They will probably musk on you as well. They'll basically poop on your hands. They have a nasty personality. That's just how they are. However, so what, right? people, you know, I'm thinking of getting a blood python, blood python sometimes down the road. I really like these chunky boys. I like how they look. I like how heavy they are. I like how short in length they are. I like how heavy they are. This viper boa looks mean as grit. However, it looks super cool. It looks like a viper. It has a look like a viper. It looks super cool. I think their bad temperament adds to their appeal, right? I'm in the market for an abusive relationship, right, guys? It's one of those things where it kind of does grow on you, and even though they'll bite you if you handle them, these guys don't have arboreal teeth like an emerald tree boa or emerald tree python. It won't skewer you, you know, you'll just get nipped at, and that's perfectly fine. Just pull them out, give them time, give them your dedication. Eventually, I am sure eventually, they will come to be okay with your presence and be okay with your hands. Now, the last con I want to talk about is, quite frankly, the biggest con is that they're mostly wild caught. I know a couple of breeders nearby from me that do produce them, and that's pretty darn cool. You got to make sure that you are buying, if they say that they're captive bred and born, to make sure that they're able to give you the receipts, give you pictures of the parents, pictures of the eggs maybe, you know, things like that, to verify that these guys are captive bred, because the captive bred baby is several times more hardy than a wild caught, right? So if you are going to buy a wild caught individual, just be prepared to properly hydrate and properly humidify and properly hydrate, because these guys need to be hydrated, right? So all the caveats that come with wild caught apply here. Make sure that you're buying from a nice, responsible source, and you should be good on your way. Now, the pros of this species is they're basically a smaller version of blood pythons. You know, they have that same spunky attitude. It's, you know, it's not a ball python where they're basically rocks. These guys hiss. They buck ya and all that stuff. However, that adds to their charm, I believe. These guys look like vipers and they act like it, but they're not venomous, which is awesome. If I could have pet a gaboon pit viper and it not envenomate me, even though it might nip me, I would love to hold on to a gaboon pit viper, right? I might get skewered by their teeth. However, it's a small price to pay for holding such an amazing animal, and I think that applies here as well. And overall, these guys really aren't available. If you look on Fauna Classifieds, which is basically where I find most of my more rare snakes, they're really not offered all that often. They're pretty hard to find. So if you do find one, it's gonna be once upon a blue moon, right? They're not ridiculously rare. However, they do come to the market sparingly. So if you are planning on getting one of these guys, to basically prepare to wait for a bit. Come into contact with the breeder. If someone's selling babies, get into contact with them. Maybe they'll, if they are still producing, maybe they'll put you on a wait list. And they'll contact you before they sell out, right? Now, in closing thoughts, the Viper Boa is basically a smaller version of the blood. Different coloration. The coloration isn't as out there as a blood python. However, it has a very nice, wicked body. Has, you know, like a very nice Death Adder, brownish, golden browns to it. It looks very cool. They don't eat much. They eat once every 2 weeks, so they'll be eating, you know, maybe a large rat twice a month, and that's all they should be getting. So it's easy on the budget, and their enclosure really isn't too much either. You know, you can have them in a nicely set up bin, nicely set up rack, and they'll do perfectly well. They don't. They probably wouldn't prefer glass terraria like an exoterra anyway, since these guys are a little more timid and they don't like prying eyes too much. So it sits basically fairly well with someone that has a growing collection. And basically, if you've had experience with rainbow boas, you'll basically perfectly set up to have a viper boa. These guys love humidity, so if you have experience with different amphibians that like to have high humidity, or rainbow boas that love to have high humidity, the viper boa will sit comfortably with you. Of course, if you have only had experience with arid reptiles like bearded dragons or strophaurus viper geckos, it might come off as a little different and a little more demanding, since you are going to have to keep up with that humidity and clean water. However, realistically, this animal, it doesn't demand too much. So overall, the viper boa is an animal I would recommend to anybody expecting a feisty snake, right? And overall, they look like freaking vipers, man. Expect to have them a viper attitude, right? So that has been basically the viper boa through a bird's eye view. And that's it. So if you like these bird's eye view videos, these series, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Go down below and tell me of another animal that you want me to talk about. Is there a particular animal that really doesn't get a lot of love in the community and you really want to bring forward? Or maybe another animal that you want to know a little bit more information about and that you want me to dig for you? Let me know. As always, thanks guys for coming by and watching my video, listening to me talk. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks, guys.